Yes, excellent. So yes, my name is Kristian Bjørkelo. I'm an associate professor of digital culture at the University of Bergen and an associate professor of journalism and communication at Nord University in Bodø. And I'm right now in always sunny Bergen, Norway, enjoying, you know, this. So, yes, I'm here as someone who is keenly invested in tabletop spaces, and both as a hobbyist and as a researcher. But then I have a confession to make. I don't do much Warhammer. Well, apart from religiously playing Space Crusade on the Amiga and having a lot of fun with Dawn of War, I don't engage much with Warhammer games. I don't read the books, I don't collect the miniatures, and I don't paint them. I paint a lot of other stuff, and I collect a lot of other games. Um, and when fellow hobbyists ask me why I don't do Warhammer, I will just wave it off and say I don't like the aesthetics, which is yeah, kind of true. But give me a Nurgle or Plague Marine, I'm all over it, right? I love them. Or I'll say I don't care for the mechanics, and yeah, sure, I there are better rule sets out there for me, I think. Yes, yes, I'm horrible. I see the comments. Um, so here I am, right? Uh, and I am very sorry for this presentation. Right? I am going to be a bit of a killjoy, and I am going to come with a bit of a provocation and a bit of a warning from the game studies field and how I kind of perceive Warhammer and Games Workshop operating in this area and how we as academics engage with that. So I'm sorry, preemptively sorry for what I'm going to say, but there is a cat at the end, which is beautiful. So I hope you'll forgive me when you see that. So I am concerned. I am concerned about the future of tabletop gaming, both as a hobbyist and as an academic interest. And some of you might identify with being both here, right? We are both here because we love tabletop gaming and we love, the opportunity to do research in that field, in this case on Warhammer. And we have people from all over the academic world here at this conference, and it's kind of cool here to talk about Warhammer. We're going to talk about miniature painting. We're going to talk about collecting small toys and playing with them. It is kind of cool, and I'm very happy to be here. And for a lot of you and a lot of people out there, this hobby, it starts and ends with Warhammer. It starts and ends with Games Workshop. Um, it might even start and end with Warhammer 40K, and that's it. Um, and that's fine. You know, that's just fine. Enjoy it. I'm not here to stop people from enjoying themselves. And it's natural that people are into this. It is a huge IP. It's huge. But it didn't start out that way, right? So it started out as Games Workshop started out as a company that distributed other games, and then it grew into this huge behemoth we see today with this huge IP, and that's a lot thanks to virtual integration of owning every part of the process and every part of this hobby. And as you can see, these are numbers from 2016. That's a 10 year, almost 10 years and a pandemic ago, right? And we all know how the pandemic was for miniature hobbies. It was huge, right? And the biggest of the games in this catalog of Games Workshop is, of course, Warhammer 40K. It's uh, well, nothing short of an amazing success story for a British company. Just looking at the kind of the breadth of this game and its IP from not just the tabletop space. We're talking novels, video games. Right where I got introduced to it, there are movies. There are board games. There's there has been talk of a live action TV series, but we'll see what happens, right? So there's a lot of things within the Warhammer space, and as we can see in this conference, there's a lot to talk about, right? There is not a shortage of topics from very different part of Warhammer we can discuss here, and I'm really looking forward to hearing it all. So what then is my issue, right? Well, let's pull back a little. A couple of years ago, I published a paper about D&D because I had issues, but because D&D has many similarities with Warhammer as an IP and as a business. Both Games Workshop and Wizards of the Coast are doing their damnedest to kind of monopolize and control as much of the market shares as possible. They are doing their best to become synonymous of role-playing games. You hear a lot about Dungeons and Dragons in every form and shape as synonymous of tabletop role-playing games. To an extreme extent, to the point where when I attend game studies conferences, I noticed that when I went to the analog, the tabletop track for the game studies conference, there was always a lot of talk about D&D, no other games. That was the topic, and maybe some Warhammer, right? Those were the topics. And I made a joke a couple of years ago that it was like going to the Super Mario Bros. Conference, right? That's a Super Mario Brothers conference. We are just talking about one game, one single game. So I ended up sitting down with the papers that was written for the conferences and elsewhere and counting the mentions of other games in these papers. And, it was mostly just Dungeons and Dragons. So that kind of got me down a little path here to discuss the fact that we're focusing on one segment of gaming culture with one specific history. There's a singular rule set we're studying, and as in game studies, we're very into mechanics and discussing the rules and how does that influence play. And we are focusing only on one set of rules among many others. And we are accepting the narrative of Wizards of the Coast when we're doing that. And we're accepting the narrative of global profit-seeking corporation that wants to monopolize an entire hobby. So what does that bring us now, right? For the Warhammer Conference? Well, it does bring us to the Super Mario Brothers Conference. I'm sorry, right? It's going to be fun, I'm sure, but that's what it is. Looking at a lot of great topics here, and people from both from academic institutions and independent scholars from all manners of field coming together to discuss one game. As someone who loves gaming culture, I'm excited. The range of topics, I don't know which tracks to follow. They're all interesting. But as a critical academic, I feel a sense of unease at how easy we are following along with Games Workshop's narrative of the Games Workshop hobby or the Warhammer hobby. Right? I'm skipping that slide because I've talked through that. So they even refer to it as both the Warhammer hobby and the Games Workshop hobby. It is not miniature wargaming. It's not miniature hobby. It's not wargaming hobby. It is the game that they are referring to, and it's the company. That is the concept that they're selling. It becomes synonymous of, well, miniature wargaming. And long gone are the days when Games Workshop worked as a games distributor, right? Through vertical integration, they've gotten control of an entire IP that is completely dominating the market. And like Wizards of the Coast, Games Workshop is replacing the hobby with themselves, both in popular culture, in media, in the stores, right? If I go to the local gaming store that has all manner of games, all brands of everything, if I want to buy a miniature game, it's just Games Workshop. Or I could go by the local hobby store to buy a game, and still Games Workshop. In my town, there are no other games available for someone who wants to play miniature wargaming. right? So they're monopolizing and colonizing this cultural space. And we can notice that in the algorithms, YouTubers will be, more accessible, more visible if they use and reference Warhammer rather than other war games and miniature games. And then how about in academia, right? What are we doing here? We are again adding attention, giving attention to Games Workshop and Warhammer, and accepting that narrative of the Warhammer hobby and the Games Workshop hobby. And by doing that, we might blind ourselves to the wider hobby or the broader hobby, right? There's a lot of games out there. There are a lot of interesting things going on there. And there are a lot of kind of push and pull aspects of this hobby where we see games cropping up just to be an alternative to Warhammer. Why is that not of interest to us, right? And I fear for the interest for the future of critical academics who are basically just repeating this narrative of Games Workshop being the hobby. So we will see there are plenty of critical perspectives on Games Workshop and on Warhammer at this conference. We will see a lot of that. But I miss often that criticism and that critique of the narrative itself, of the role of Games Workshop and Warhammer in the broader hobby and the market space. So are we just not, even if we are spending our time critiquing, for instance, the lack of satire in Warhammer that's supposed to be there, are we then not just also following the script? So yes. And they also use in their reports, they use references to total global domination, which I find hilarious. Okay, it's a silly euphemism, typical of marketing jargon, of corporate jargon. But there is some truth to it. Their natural attempt as a corporation to gain as much part of the market as possible, to colonize, to monopolize the market. That is capitalism. But it's also an aspect of kind of cultural imperialism in a hobby space. We should not be surprised by it, but neither should we always be that accepting of it, or should we aid it along. So that is my provocation for you guys. That is me being a killjoy. I am very sorry. We're going to have fun for the rest of the conference. Here's my cat and research assistant, Simba. And again, I'm very, very sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this presentation. And again, please, I think we are few enough. I'm trying to moderate a little bit, but please also go just first when you raised your hand, and looking forward to comments or questions.
Yes, so Kristian, thank you very much for the very welcome and also provocative presentation. I think you brought up some really relevant points there, and I think that also kind of reflects the field of game studies as well. Like game studies is, for the most part, game studies means digital game studies. So and even in kind of that more niche role of non-digital games, we see like miniature games in an even more niche role, and then basically that whole role is dominated by Games Workshop. I would however like to kind of not really contest you, but hear about your opinions on kind of finding the balance. Like, how do we acknowledge the fact that we are that there is a diversity of games out there, but then again, how do we kind of combine that with the fact that Warhammer is like it is objectively a very dominant force in the miniature gaming. So kind of like, like if we're doing digital game research, for example, then people will look at games that are very popular because of their like cultural relevance, for example, because like, rather than studying an indie game with 15 players, they will gravitate towards something like Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty or something with a player base of millions. So how do we kind of how do we compensate? Like, do we study smaller games more? Do we kind of do we look at or should we look at kind of the miniaturing hobby more generally, or like what's the what was your solution for the Dungeons and Dragons issue? So I'd like to hear about your views on this.
Yeah, thank you for that impossible question. No, I totally agree that it is a difficult thing to balance, because Warhammer and Games Workshop cannot and should not be ignored. Right? I'm not picketing the conference here. I'm not standing outside saying no. Right? This is awesome. This is fun. But I do think we need to open our spaces, not necessarily at this conference, but in game studies conferences and elsewhere, about discussion of other games, and maybe also discuss what do these games, how do both the aesthetics and the mechanics and the production of them influence how they are being played and who they are being played by. All these kind of questions that disappear if we focus only on one game. For D&D, it is a much easier question, because when we look at the academic works on D&D so far, and a lot of the media presentation of D&D and how they discuss, especially the Let's Play videos, there's a lot of weight given to the social aspect and how these are incredible improvisational social games that tell great stories, and those stories happen in spite of the mechanics, not because of it, right? And then you have role-playing games that have actual mechanics to incentivize social play. So there, the answer is simple: stop talking that much about D&D. If we want to talk about the social play, there are games out there that are doing that a lot more interesting. There are mechanics out there that explore a lot of interesting stuff. I have some papers coming about Blood Feud, for instance, and how that explores toxic masculinity through its mechanics. Those are possibilities. In the tabletop space, there's generally not rule sets or mechanics for the social interaction. So that kind of goes out the window. But if there are games for that, let me know. I would be fascinated to hear about them. But there are other aspects here, including the politics of the players and the company, that should be explored, and it could be explored if we compare it to other companies, right? So how does the player base of a one-page rule differentiate from Warhammer? Why? Is it only the rules that make them want to go there instead of to Warhammer? Or is it also maybe the politics of the Imperium and kind of the satire that is of Warhammer that is fading? Is that an aspect of it? The Warhammer community has been criticized for its toxicity, right? Even by Games Workshop themselves. So there are a lot of different pathways to go here. I would like to see more papers on the miniature hobby in general, and on different games and different communities. I myself am working on something on the Fallout Wasteland Warfare community and stuff like that. So I think there's a room for discussing more games without stopping a discussion on Warhammer. I'm going on here, but the discussion of Warhammer should be large because it's a large game, a large IP, and a large company. But I'd like to see more discussion in general about the tabletop space.